Should we just talk more generally, first of all, about how many voters might still be undecided, even at this point? We're less than 24 hours, aren't we, before polls open? Genuinely, how many people have still got to make up their minds, Greg Swinson?
Yeah, I would imagine there's low information voters that are still undecided, that maybe go, wait till game day and maybe talk about it in the car on the way to the polls. It's really tough. But, 2 weeks ago, it was around 3% undecided. That's a historic low. That's very rare. However, in a race where the polls are all under a point or maybe a point and a half, then 3% actually matters. So it's, most people have a view on Donald Trump, obviously, love him or hate him. And then I think, Vice President Harris, less so, but by the time, the campaign came near the end, I think people have made up their minds. But 3% is low, but not in a tight race like this.
and they are two very different prospects, aren't they, Amy?
Yeah.
Two very different prospects indeed, which would lead me to think, well, that perhaps that's why most people have made their mind up, because you're not suddenly going to, you're not really going to be weighing up Trump or Kamala Harris. You probably made your mind up on them. But I suppose more pertinent for Kamala Harris is whether someone's bothered enough to turn up and vote for her, right? That is the important thing. Most Trump voters are pretty exercised already. We've seen that through the polling. But what's important for Kamala Harris is to get people out to vote.
Absolutely. And really, it's actually important for both sides, because there's about 40% on each side who see voting as a habit. They're going to turn out. They turn out during primaries. They turn out during general elections. And then you have that remaining 20% that's in the middle, who not only are they a little bit more up for grabs because they're sort of more weakly aligned with a party or maybe are truly independent, but also they don't see voting as a habit. And so they need a reason to go vote. It needs to be convenient for them. It needs to be that someone reminds them to go vote. It needs to be that the polling place is in an accessible location from where they need to be, or open hours that work for their schedule, and whether or not they have to pick up children or take care of someone else. And so all of these factors really come together. And so it means that it's not only making sure you've got people on your side, but it's also actually getting them to the polls. The potential issue that we have is whether what to do, right? Especially when we're talking about sort of those in the middle. To sort of Greg's point, there's undecideds, but there's also sort of a group of people where in many ways, it's less that they're undecided about who they like, but they're undecided about whether to vote. And also, particularly possibly those who might be on either side, but don't really like the candidate that's on either side. So you're more moderate Republicans or more moderate Democrats who are in many ways sort of saying, do I want to turn out and vote for this person? So even if I did show up to vote, okay, I'm most likely to vote this side or the other, do I actually take the effort to turn out?
Interesting. Okay. Let's hear from both candidates then. More than 50% of people have voted so far. 50% of ballots have already been cast, which I think is probably a record, isn't it? Half of those people who are going to vote have voted already. Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are holding events in Pennsylvania today. It's part of a big final push. Here's Harris speaking in Scranton, in the last hour.
We're going to keep doing this work with the optimism that it requires to be strong. Everyone here knows, in the context of your family, in your life, when you believe something is possible, you put in the hard work, and you know it's good work. Hard work is good work. It's joyful work, and we get the job done. Let's get this done. Thank you all.
Scranton, rather than Scanton. That's me reading the wrong word. I know Donald Trump's losing his voice. I've seen some reports about that, and we'll hear from him in a minute and just see if we can pick up that. But I mean, Kamala sounds a bit stretched. She sounds like it's the day before the big day, doesn't she, Greg?
Yeah, it sounded more like early August and late July, happy, clappy, joy. There wasn't a lot of meat on the bone there. I'm not suggesting that that's going to repel anybody. But I think if anything, she's probably talking to her supporters, and that's nice to try to thank them and help them get excited about the last push.
So
get out the vans and try to.
She's not being aggressive.
Yeah,
she's just sort of saying, "Come on, feel the energy, unite together. We love our country, and that's what this fight is about."
That's nice, and that maybe her volunteers and her paid employees will be more prone to pick people up and drive them to the polls, which is what people have always done.
Interesting.
That's the thing you do on election day. You drive the elderly to the polls. It's nice. It's very American.
Katy Perry has taken to X to say that she's officially voted for Kamala Harris. Don't know how much of a difference that is. Zach Friend's with us, by the way, Democrat strategist, former campaign spokesperson for Barack Obama. Is this what you'd expect of Kamala Harris? Or, I'm a little bit underwhelmed, Zach, I'll be honest with you. It's such a tight race. I want them both to be going great guns.
Yeah, I think that what it really means is that everything is going to come down to Pennsylvania. I think that is what the fact that she's spending the entire last day there. That's pretty untraditional, actually. I mean, to only be in one state, it really tells you what their internal polling is showing, that without Pennsylvania, there's no presidency. So I think that's really what this comes down to.
Interesting. Okay, let's hear from Donald Trump. He's been speaking in Raleigh, North Carolina this afternoon. He's made threats to Mexico over migration. We know this is a hot topic. It is a people pleaser for Donald Trump. He wants to impose immediate tariffs on the country if they don't stop migrants from crossing their shared border.
If they don't stop this onslaught of criminals and drugs coming into our country, I'm going to immediately impose a 25% tariff on everything they send in to the United States of America.
How's that going to go down, Professor Amy Steigerwalt, with his supporters, but also those people who may still be weighing up whether perhaps they're a Republican supporter, but they're still a little bit uneasy about Donald Trump?
I imagine that his supporters love it. That is one of the areas that he does particularly well in polling and gets very good responses at his different rallies on immigration, on border security. It's a little bit less clear how it plays with those sort of more undecided or moderate voters. Tariffs, generally speaking, result in higher prices and inflation. And so that can be of concern, especially because there's quite a lot of goods that we rely on Mexico to give. There's also, I think, the concern of whether or not, number one, that could even be directly put in place, and also what effect can be had there. But I think it's a question of, again, sort of as Greg was noting, today is about appealing to those who are on your side, but again, haven't actually turned out yet to vote. There are still a lot of people in the country who will vote and who will vote on election day. There's no voting that's going on today anywhere in the country. It comes down to tomorrow. And again, it's that last push. We have historically, especially comparatively around the world, very low rates of voting. It is certainly not mandatory, but it is also, our rates are typically much lower than in other democracies. And so because of that, it's a lot of work that has to be done to get people out and to fire them up and to convince them that this is something worth spending their time on. And so what we're seeing are, slightly different approaches to that. But for both, what they are really trying to do is this isn't about the middle. It's not about the middle anymore. Now it's really about ensuring that you're able to turn out those who support you and get them to actually cast their ballots.
Amy, you nailed it. I mean, it's absolutely true. Okay, tariffs are inflationary, and there's a lot of flaws with 25%. Also, Amy, you're right. It would never actually happen. Okay, there is a trade agreement between the old NAFTA agreement with Canada and Mexico would be a real barrier to doing that kind of thing, but it's worked before. Trump did this 5-6 years ago, threatened Mexico with tariffs, and they sure did enforce the Remain in Mexico policy, which really worked. So I think if people are thinking about the border crisis and the fact that Biden and Harris essentially turned over the management of the border to the Drug and human trafficking cartels. This will get people off the couch. I don't think it's going to convince a Harris voter to come over and vote for Trump, obviously. But it will get people off the couch, young men off the couch who are saying, this is crazy, this open border thing. If that's what it's going to take, even if it's unrealistic that it would actually happen, if that threat works, it worked before. Maybe when these young men, women were too young to vote, but they might see it as a reason to get off the couch.
Yeah, Mexico's the US's top trading partner. How long will Donald Trump's voice last? Will it last the day? We've seen Kamala's voice sounding a bit stretched earlier. Let's have a listen to Trump.
Very special hello to North Carolina. Thank you. We've had a lot of luck in North Carolina. We won it twice. We won every primary.
I mean, there's a voiceover career there if it all goes wrong. You know, basically, when you lose your voice, people tell you to just speak slowly. So just conserve. Don't ever speak quickly because it'll sound stretched. So Donald Trump's clearly been told there, just speak deep and low and slow.
It's nice to see Donald Trump doing what he's told and listening to advisors. It's refreshing. So he should do it more.
Zach, friend, let's hear some more from you. Look, Kamala Harris was on Saturday Night Live, wasn't she, at the weekend? Elon Musk said it was funny, but it was unfair, Zach, friend, because Trump didn't get a go. He didn't get a spot.
Well, my understanding is that actually that NBC's doing something or just did something with him during a NASCAR event. But I'll say that, you know, this is a very interesting take of how this election is actually being played out in a lot of non-traditional media sources. And I think this is something Donald Trump actually does a very good job of, in particular on the podcast side. But the Saturday Night Live skit is an important one. There's sort of this belief that you have to go on the traditional media in the United States, be it the MSNBC or CNN or these traditional shows on Fox, et cetera. But realistically, the reach of the voters that the other two panelists were just talking about, the folks that are maybe on your side, but whether or not they're actually going to get off the couch on the day, are going to be more likely watching Saturday Night Live than not. So I thought it was really nice of her to do it. I was surprised, and I feel pretty connected into the campaign and what the campaign's events are going to do. So they did a very good job of keeping a lid on it. But you've seen a lot of non-traditional media outreach by both of the candidates, in particular the Trump campaign. Like I said, I feel like they've done a very good job in that regard on it. And I think this is how you get these non-likely voters to show up, is you have to meet them where they are in the spaces that they're listening or watching.
Yeah. Why didn't she do the Joe Rogan podcast? I know it was kind of put down to sort of she wanted him to come to her and they couldn't make the timings work. But if she'd wanted to do it enough, Zach, she would have done it. And that would have appealed to a huge tranche of, you know, non-traditional Democrat Kamala Harris voters potentially.
You know, I agree with you on that. I mean, I think that Pete Buttigieg is actually a perfect example of this when he ran not just for president, but since he's been transportation secretary too. He basically says yes to every outlet everywhere. And I think that whether it's a podcast or a small local newspaper, you've got to hit them all right now in this fragmented media structure. So I would have advised internally for her to do that. I mean, she has, I will say, hit a lot of spots that the Biden presidency didn't, in particular the small local community newspaper circuit she's done across the United States, and she has hit some non-traditional podcasts in a way that he hasn't. But I do think I'm with you on the fact that I think that Rogan, irrespective of what people's individual views are of him, he realistically has a very large base of people that you need to motivate in this election.
I love that you've likened Pete Buttigieg to the sort of Wes Streeting, if I'm to give an equivalent of a minister who, fair enough to him, shows up and does a lot of media. When we come back, let's talk a little bit about where the polling is at. There's been a new, I mean, there is a poll. There are 5 polls published today, but we'll have a little look at that. And I want to have a look at the dollar slumping as well after the latest polling for Donald Trump, whether there's anything behind that. Let's talk about where we are with polling, because this is interesting. I think if we'd have had this conversation last week, and, you know, certainly some of the big cheeses in the polling world last week were all pretty enthusiastic for Donald Trump. It was thought that Kamala had stalled and Donald Trump was gaining a bit of ground. We had that shock Iowa poll at the weekend, which is, well, I'll ask Greg Swenson in a minute how relevant that is for the Republican campaign. And what we've seen over the last maybe 24, 48 hours is a little bit of bounce towards Kamala Harris. the fact of the matter is, it is still too close to call. But the latest poll, it's PBS News, NPR, Marist, published today, shows Harris holding a 4-point lead over Trump with a support of 51% of likely voters compared to Trump's 47%. The lead lies, it's just outside the study's 3.5 point margin of error. So that, leans a little bit into Kamala Harris. Zach Friend, how confident are you feeling? I mean, does this just come down to the wire, or in this last 24, 48 hours, are we starting to see a little bit of a bedded-in advantage for Kamala Harris?
Oh, I'm not going to be comfortable until the election's called for her, but I think that there are three things that are actually true here. One of them is that while the election is very close, I don't actually think the Electoral College is going to be that close either way. And at the end of the day, it won't seem then that the election was that close, even though it may be decided by a handful of votes in about 5 states. I also believe that the pollsters have acknowledged that they have been undersampling women a bit on their modeling. And that could explain, because there's been some adjustments in just the last week on that, why there's been movement back toward Kamala Harris, who's doing exceptionally well with women, in particular, older women who do have a tendency to vote. So I think that there was a
55% of women. Shift. Yeah. So just... Again, latest polling shows that 55% of women said that they'll back Harris in the latest poll. She does have a lean towards women. Greg, there was that shock Iowa poll. We were actually going to be speaking to Ann Selzer after 8:15. It was her polling company who came up with this Iowa poll. Now, Iowa thought not to be a swing state, thought not to be that. It's a very red state.
It really is.
Traditionally, Republican. Trump won there easily, didn't he, in 2016 and 2020. But here we saw a complete shift to Kamala Harris.
I'm not a pollster, but I would say if she actually wins Iowa, then we can all just go to bed early and hang it up.
Because, so you can make that call.
Yeah, I mean, unless it's because it's there's some correlation with other Midwestern states, not perfectly correlated. There are blue states in the Midwest, obviously Minnesota, Illinois, but I would be really shocked. The same day that Seltzer came out with her poll, and she's got a great reputation, but Emerson came out Trump +9. It wasn't Trump +1, Trump +2. I mean, that's a real outlier because it is a very red state. It used to be a swing state. Barack Obama won it in 2008, maybe in 2012, maybe not. But it's since become, with Kim Reynolds, great governor, with the senator, spacing on her name. It's become a solidly red state. Every statewide office is held by a Republican. The entire congressional delegation is Republican. It just would be a complete oddity if that poll was legit. Again, I'm not a pollster. I can't. I'm not judging on the poll and Seltzer. I get it. And maybe she polled the right number of women, and definitely Kamala Harris is going to do better with women. There's no doubt.
Okay.
So maybe everyone else is wrong.